My name is Meredith Cross. I am 35 years old, and what I'm about to tell you is something I never thought I would survive. When I first took the job as a nanny for the Whitlock family, I believed it would be a fresh start, a way to rebuild my life. After a series of painful losses that had left me hollow and desperate for purpose, but what unfolded in that house was far darker than anything I could have imagined. From the moment I stepped across their pristine marble threshold, I sensed something unspoken hanging in the air, a heaviness like secrets pressed into the walls, waiting to bleed through at the worst possible moment. The Whitlocks seemed like the perfect employers, wealthy, charismatic, generous to a fault, with two angelic children whose laughter filled the halls, but beneath their glossy smiles and curated lives lay cruelty. I wasn't prepared for a cruelty that would twist my devotion into something monstrous. The story I'm about to share isn't just about betrayal or revenge. It's about how love, when pushed into a corner and poisoned by manipulation, can transform into something vengeful, something that claws and burns until it consumes everything. If you really want to know how it all happened, then stay with me till the very end, because my story will leave you speechless. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and remember, this story is written and edited by Dark Life Side Diaries. When I first met Katherine Whitlock, she was every bit the image of a picture-perfect mother, her manicured hand extended in polite welcome, her blonde hair swept neatly back as though every strand had been carefully positioned for a photograph, and her husband, Daniel, followed behind her with an effortless charm that made him seem like a man incapable of cruelty. They gave me a tour of the house, showing me the children's rooms decorated like something out of a fairy tale, and I told myself this was finally where I belonged, finally where I could give my heart to children who needed me. But within days, I noticed the cracks in the perfect picture. Catherine's smiles were sharp, her compliments laced with disdain, and her eyes watched me with a suspicion I hadn't earned. Daniel, meanwhile, lingered a little too long in doorways, his gaze holding mine as if he wanted to peel back layers I wasn't offering in the children's suite. Emily and Jacob were affectionate in a way that seemed desperate, clutching my hands as if they needed saving from something they couldn't name. I should have left the first week when the unease coiled in my stomach like a warning, but I didn't. I told myself I could handle it, that this family needed me, and for a time I believed my presence made a difference. Turning point came late one night when Emily woke crying, whispering that she had seen someone standing at her window. I rushed to her room, but there was no one there, only the night pressing heavily against the glass. When I comforted her, she clung to me and whispered, "Don't leave us, Meredith. Mommy gets angry when we cry, and Daddy says we're weak." My heart broke hearing those words, and I realized the smiles the Whitlocks showed the world were nothing more than masks concealing something rotten. I started noticing more bruises on Jacob's arms, explained away as roughhousing, Emily's fearful glances toward her mother, and Daniel's sudden temper that flashed when he thought no one else was watching. I tried to protect the children quietly, but Katherine grew colder toward me, criticizing every small thing I did, while Daniel's gaze turned darker, more possessive. I wasn't just their me anymore. I was being pulled into the twisted orbit of a family that thrived on control. One evening, Katherine accused me of stealing a bracelet she claimed had gone missing, though I knew it was a lie. She searched my room, humiliated me in front of the children, and later whispered in my ear, "Don't get too comfortable, Meredith. You're not part of this family. You never will be." That night, I sat awake staring at the ceiling, and for the first time in years, I felt rage simmering beneath my skin. I wasn't just a caretaker to those children, I was their only shield against the people who were supposed to love them most. As days passed, the cruelty escalated. Daniel cornered me in the kitchen one evening, his hand brushing against mine with a smile that made my skin crawl, and when I pulled away, his expression hardened to something dangerous. I knew then that this wasn't just a toxic household, it was a trap still. The children clung to me, whispering their fears when Catherine's voice thundered through the halls, or when Daniel slammed doors in drunken anger, and their tears became my fuel. I began documenting everything, photographing bruises, recording arguments through the thin walls, saving text messages where Katherine mocked my presence and Daniel made veiled threats. I didn't know yet what I planned to do with this evidence, but I felt in my bones that the Whitlocks would eventually destroy me if I didn't find a way to strike first, and strike I would. The night everything shifted, Katherine hosted a dinner party, parading me in front of her wealthy friends as though I were some disposable servant, making cutting remarks about my clothes, my age, and my single status. The humiliation burned deep, but when I glanced at Emily and Jacob seated quietly at the end of the table, their eyes downcast, I saw myself reflected in their silence. I wasn't just enduring cruelty for myself, I was enduring it for them. That night, Emily slipped a crumpled drawing under my door. It showed a stick figure of me holding her hand, with a large X drawn through Katherine and Daniel. Scrawled at the bottom in a child's shaky handwriting were the words, "Please save us." I sat trembling on my bed, clutching that piece of paper, and I knew there was no turning back. The Whitlocks thought they could break me down, strip me of my dignity, and keep me bound to their toxic games, but they underestimated what love twisted into fury can become. I started planning in secret, waiting for the perfect moment, watching their routines, memorizing the layout of the house, and hiding away the evidence I had collected in a locked drawer beneath my belongings. I began to think of revenge not as an act of anger, but as justice for Emily, for Jacob, and for myself. I was determined that this house would no longer be their prison, and that the Whitlocks would finally pay for the darkness they had buried beneath their polished smiles. But plans are fragile things, and one mistake can turn them to ash. One night, as I slipped quietly into the study to transfer files from Daniel's computer, a hand closed around my wrist with an iron grip. I turned, heart slamming against my ribs, and found Katherine standing behind me, her eyes blazing with suspicion, her lips curling into a smile that promised ruin. "What exactly are you doing, Meredith?" she asked, her voice dripping with venom, and in that moment I knew she had discovered far more than I had ever intended her to see. Katherine's grip on my wrist tightened until my bones ached, her painted nails digging into my skin as if she wanted to draw blood, and her eyes flicked toward the glowing screen of Daniel's computer where I had just pulled up files. I wasn't supposed to see financial records, hidden transfers even, messages that hinted at dealings far darker than marital cruelty. "Curiosity will kill you, Meredith," she whispered, her breath hot against my cheek, and then she shoved me back so hard that I stumbled into the edge of the desk, my mind spun with excuses, scrambling to explain, but Katherine's expression told me she already knew. I was lying. She didn't scream, didn't summon Daniel, didn't even demand an explanation. She simply smirked, shut the laptop with a click that felt like a gunshot, and murmured, "We'll talk later." That single promise terrified me more than any threat could have, because Katherine Whitlock wasn't impulsive. She was calculating, methodical, and I realized then she wasn't just a cruel mother or jealous employer. She was dangerous in a way I hadn't yet comprehended. For the next 2 days, the house felt like a stage where every move I made was being watched. Katherine smiled at me in front of the children, even praised my cooking, but behind her eyes was a storm I could feel building. Daniel, too, seemed sharper, more suspicious, lingering in the doorways, more often his once flirtatious glances, now cutting, probing, as though he knew something but couldn't quite name it. The children sensed it as well. Emily clutched my arm whenever Katherine entered the room. Jacob refused to leave my side, and at night they whispered their fears into my ear, telling me they heard Mommy and Daddy arguing about me after bedtime. "They want to get rid of you," Jacob whispered one night, his little hand shaking as he held mine, and my heart nearly broke in two. I knew I had to accelerate my plan before the Whitlocks decided what getting rid of me meant. I dug deeper into Daniel's files whenever I could, carefully covering my tracks, and what I found chilled me. Transactions to offshore accounts, large sums of money that didn't match his supposed business income, and emails that hinted at blackmail and hush money. Katherine wasn't just his polished trophy wife, she was complicit, her name threaded through coded messages and encrypted attachments. Whatever they were hiding wasn't just domestic cruelty, it was criminal, and if I could gather enough evidence, I could not only free myself and the children, but ensure the Whitlocks would never hurt anyone again. But Katherine wasn't as blind as I hoped. She began leaving me subtle reminders that she knew what I was doing. My locked drawer left slightly ajar, my phone placed in a different position than I had left it, a cold smile when she'd say things like, "You must be tired from staying up so late." I felt trapped in a tightening net, every move a risk, every word a possible trigger, and yet the children's faces gave me courage. Then came the night Daniel crossed a line I could never forgive. I was washing dishes when he cornered me, his hand slamming against the counter beside me as he leaned in close. His breath reeked of whiskey, his eyes bloodshot and wild. "You think you're better than us, don't you?" he hissed, his other hand brushing along my arm in a way that made my stomach churn. I shoved him back, but he only laughed, a cruel, mocking sound that echoed through the kitchen. "You're mine as long as you live in this house, don't forget that." I fled to my room, locking the door, trembling with rage and disgust. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. Protecting the children wasn't enough anymore. I needed revenge, not just for them, but for myself. For every moment of fear, humiliation, and violation, I promised myself that by the time I was finished, Daniel and Katherine Whitlock would wish they had never met me. began setting traps of my own. I installed hidden recording devices in the children's rooms and in the study, catching Katherine's venomous tirades and Daniel's drunken threats. I used burner accounts to duplicate Daniel's financial files and sent copies to a secure cloud he couldn't touch. I coached Emily and Jacob to write down everything their parents said when I wasn't around, disguising it as a secret game, and the things they scribbled in their notebooks made me sick. Katherine threatening to lock Emily in her room for crying, Daniel telling Jacob he'd make him tough by hitting him harder. Every word, every act, every bruise became part of the arsenal. I was building a weapon of truth I would unleash at the right moment. But the Whitlocks were clever too. Katherine began isolating me, assigning me endless tasks to keep me away from the children, while Daniel's advances grew more brazen, as though he were trying to break me before I could expose them. I pretended to bend a smile to play the obedient servant, but inside I was sharper than ever, my hatred polished to a blade. The climax came sooner than I anticipated. One rainy night, Emily woke screaming again, and when I rushed to her room, I found Daniel standing over her bed, his hand raised as though he were about to strike her. Without thinking, I threw myself between them, shoving him back, my voice shaking with fury as I screamed to him to leave her alone. Katherine appeared in the doorway, her face a mask of cold amusement, and for a sickening moment, I realized she'd been watching, waiting to see what I would do. Enough games, Meredith, she said softly, her tone more terrifying than any scream. You've forgotten your place. She stepped into the room, her hand slipping into the pocket of her silk robe, and when she pulled it out, the glint of a knife caught the dim light. My breath froze. The children clung to me, sobbing, and I knew this was no longer about control or humiliation. The Whitlocks wanted me gone permanently, but what they didn't know was that I was ready. Earlier that week, I had uploaded all my evidence, videos, recordings, financial documents to multiple sources, including law enforcement contacts and anonymous online forums. All it would take was one scheduled email to unleash it all, and that email was set to send if I didn't deactivate it by morning. So as Katherine advanced with the knife and Daniel blocked the doorway, I forced myself to smile, my fear masked by the fire of defiance. You can kill. And me tonight, I whispered, clutching the children to me. But by tomorrow, everyone will know exactly who you are. For the first time, I saw real fear flicker in Katherine's eyes, though Daniel's rage only deepened, his fists clenching as he lunged forward. I braced for impact, my heart pounding, my mind screaming, and in that suspended moment, I understood something chilling. I might not survive the night, but if I played this right, the Whitlocks' empire of lies would crumble and my revenge would be eternal. The rain battered the windows like 1,000 desperate fists as Daniel lunged at me, his bulk crashing into my shoulder with enough force to send me reeling against the bed frame, the children screaming as Emily clutched at my waist and Jacob buried his face in my side, and Katherine's knife gleamed like a serpent's fang in the dim light as she advanced with deliberate chilling grace, her lips curling into a smile that said she'd been waiting for this moment all along. I twisted, shoving Emily and Jacob behind me, adrenaline surging as I grabbed the nearest object, a lamp from the nightstand, and swung it hard enough to catch Daniel in the temple. The shattering bulb sprang sparks across the carpet as he roared in pain and staggered back, his hands clamping over the wound. But Katherine didn't falter, her knife flashing toward my chest with deadly precision, and I barely managed to catch her wrist. The two of us locked in a struggle that was more primal than human, her perfume mingling with the metallic tang of fear and sweat as we grappled like animals in the confines of that child's bedroom. The knife inched closer to my throat, my muscles screaming with effort, but Katherine's strength was fueled by hatred, and I felt the tip graze my skin, a hot line of pain blooming there before I twisted violently, driving my knee into her stomach, sending her crashing into the dresser where picture frames toppled and glass shattered all around her. Daniel recovered quickly, his eyes burning with a murderous rage, and he lunged again, his meaty fists grabbing my arm and hurling me against the wall so hard the plaster cracked, stars exploding across my vision as the children screamed, their cries echoing like sirens in my ears. But through the haze, I remembered the recorder hidden under Emily's bed, still running, capturing every scream, every threat, every vile word, and I clung to that knowledge like a lifeline, proof that even if I didn't make it out alive, the Whitlocks' reign of terror was coming to an end. Daniel's fist drew back for another strike when Katherine shrieked, "Not here, you fool! The blood, the mess, think!" And her voice snapped through the storm, a violence like a whip halting him for just a second, and in that heartbeat of hesitation, I darted forward, seizing the children's hands and dragging them toward the hallway, but Katherine was faster than I expected, cutting me off at the doorway with her knife raised high, her eyes wild now stripped of her practiced poise, and she hissed, "You'll never take them from me." The knife came down, and I thought that was the end, but Jacob's sweet, terrified Jacob snatched up a shard of broken glass from the floor and jabbed it into her leg with a cry of pure desperation. Katherine shrieked, the knife clattering from her hand as she buckled, and I kicked it away, scooping Jacob into my arms as I grabbed Emily's hand and tore down the hall, my lungs burning, my mind racing with only one thought: get them out. The house became a labyrinth of shadows and thunder as Daniel's heavy footsteps thundered after us, his voice booming threats that shook the walls, and Katherine's sobbing curses trailing behind like a ghost. But my determination was iron now, sharper than their knife, stronger than their fists, and I dragged the children toward the back stairwell where I had stashed a go-bag days earlier, hidden beneath an old sheet in the linen closet, packed with essentials, cash, and most importantly, an extra phone already connected to the cloud, holding every file of evidence. My fingers fumbled with the zipper as Daniel's roar closed in, and with shaking hands, I shoved the phone into Emily's pocket, whispering, "No matter what happens to me, you run and you don't look back. You get this to someone you trust." But before I could finish, Daniel's hand clamped down on my hair, yanking me backwards so violently my scalp screamed in agony, and he dragged me down the stairs, my body slumping against the steps as the children wailed, their cries piercing the thunder like alarms of innocence. Katherine limping after us with a twisted grin, knife retrieved, her bloody leg leaving a trail across the polished wood like the signature of a predator unwilling to surrender. I fought, I clawed, I kicked, but Daniel was too strong, his breath hot against my ear as he snarled, "You think you can destroy us? You're nothing, Meredith, nothing." And yet, even as he spat his venom, I smiled through the pain because I knew my timer was ticking, the email scheduled, the recordings secured, and the Whitlock's downfall was no longer in question, only the vehicle method of its delivery. They dragged me into the basement, the smell of damp concrete and mildew choking my lungs, the children locked out above as their fists pounded helplessly against the door, and Katherine circled me like a wolf, the knife gleaming, her eyes alight with a hunger for blood as she whispered, "We'll make it look like an accident, and Nanny who couldn't handle the pressure. A tragic end, and no one will ever know." But I laughed then, a sound raw and jagged that startled them, both because I could already see the cracks forming in their empire, could already imagine the police swarming this house, the headlines blazing with their disgrace, and I said, "Everyone will know, Katherine, by dawn your perfect life will be ashes." That moment of defiance enraged her beyond reason. She lunged with the knife, Daniel shouting, thunder exploding overhead, and as the blade arced down toward my heart, I twisted, grabbing her wrist once more, the blade plunging instead into Daniel's chest as his eyes widened in shock, his roar cutting off and a wet gurgle, blood blooming across his shirt like a dark flower. Katherine's scream was animalistic, echoing off the concrete walls, and I stumbled back panting, realizing that the balance of power had shifted, that Daniel Whitlock, the monster who had tormented me and his own children, was collapsing to the ground, his hand grasping at the knife like a drowning man reaching for air, and Katherine was left holding the handle, the murderess. In truth, her face twisted into a mask of horror and denial. Daniel's death wasn't clean, nor was it silent as last. Breaths rattled through the basement, like a curse, blood seeping across the cold concrete in rivulets that found every crack and crevice, while Katherine stood frozen, her hands still clutching the knife buried in his chest as if she couldn't believe what she had done, her perfect manicure stained crimson. She let out a sound I'll never forget, a high keening wail, part grief, part rage, part madness, and when her eyes finally lifted to mine, they were no longer the eyes of a polished socialite, but of a wild animal, desperate, cornered, and ready to kill. And in that moment, I understood that Katherine would rather burn her entire world to ash than face the humiliation of being exposed. She yanked the knife free with a wet, sickening sound and lunged at me with the strength of desperation, her screams echoing off the walls, and I scrambled backward, my hands slipping on Daniel's blood, my chest heaving as my back hit the shelves of old paint cans and tools, everything rattling and clattering to the floor as she slashed wildly, her blade whistling inches from my face. I seized the handle of a rusted hammer, swinging it with all the force I had left, catching her wrist in a crack of bone that sent the knife tumbling from her fingers, her scream rising in pitch as she collapsed to her knees, clutching her shattered arm, and I pressed the hammer to her throat, my hands trembling, fury and fear and exhaustion coursing through me in equal measure as I hissed, "It's over, Katherine, you're done." But she only laughed, a laugh so broken it chilled me more than her knife ever had. and spat blood onto the floor, whispering, "You think anyone will believe you? Over me? You're just the help on Katherine Whitlock, and for a heartbeat." I felt the weight of her words, the truth of her status and power, the way society bends to people like her. But then I thought of Emily's bruises, Jacob's haunted eyes, Daniel's violence, Katherine's cruelty, and the files and recordings waiting in the cloud. The email scheduled to detonate their reputation like a bomb, and I realized I didn't need to convince anyone. She had already destroyed herself. Upstairs, the children were still pounding on the locked door, their voices thin and panicked. And I couldn't let them see me break, couldn't let them see the monster win, so I shoved her back, grabbed the knife, and ran for the stairs, but Katherine wasn't finished yet. She hurled herself at my legs, dragging me down onto the blood-slick steps, her fingers clawing at my ankles with the strength of a mother protecting her empire of lies, shrieking my name over and over like a curse, but I kicked, free slamming the heel of my foot into her face until her grip loosened and I stumbled upward, gasping, the knife still clutched in my hand. I threw myself at the basement door, kicking until the wood splintered and Emily's sobs and Jacob's terrified cries washed over me like salvation, and when the lock gave way, I pulled them into my arms, their tiny bodies shaking, but alive, still alive, and I whispered, "It's over, babies, it's over," though deep down I knew it wasn't, not yet, because Katherine was still down there, and even as she wailed over Daniel's corpse promising revenge, I heard the distant wail of sirens growing closer, the storm outside no longer able to drown them out, and I smiled through my tears, realizing my scheduled email must have already gone out, that the police were coming with the recordings, the photos, the documents that would rip the Whitlocks' legacy to shreds. Still, Katherine tried one last desperate play, dragging herself up the stairs, her face a mask of blood and fury, screaming, "You'll pay for this, Meredith," as she raised her broken arm like a weapon. But the front door burst open with a crash, and officers flooded in, their guns drawn, their shouts cutting through the chaos, and in that instant, Katherine's reign ended, not with elegance or control, but with her face pressed to the hardwood, her wrists cuffed, her screams reduced to incoherent sobs as Emily and Jacob clung to me tighter than ever. The world outside the Whitlock mansion moved fast after that. The headlines, the trials, the whispered gossip of society's elite as their golden family name turned to poison overnight. Every secret I had collected spilling into the light like raw exposed from beneath fine wallpaper. And though Katherine tried to twist the story, the evidence was too strong, the recordings too damning, and the sight of Daniel's bloody corpse sealed her fate. Emily and Jacob were placed under my guardianship until proper custody could be arranged, though they clung to me as though they feared I'd vanish, and perhaps I clung back just as tightly because we had survived together, forged in fire and fear, and I couldn't abandon them to the world that had failed them so completely. I remember standing outside that house one last time, watching as it was swarmed by reporters, its windows glowing like eyes stripped of secrets, and I thought of all the lies that had lived within those walls, all the cruelty masked by wealth, and I knew the truth at last. Revenge isn't about blood or death, not really. It's about truth cutting deeper than any blade, about monsters finally being seen for what they are, about children finally sleeping without fear. My name is Meredith Cross. I am 35 years old, and what I lived through as the Whitlocks' nanny will haunt me forever, but it also made me stronger, sharper, and unafraid to stand against the powerful who think their wealth shields them from consequences. If you really want to know how it all happened, you've heard my story to the end, and now you understand. The perfect family was never perfect, and the perfect revenge was not their destruction, but their unmasking. Thanks for watching my video. Please like, share, and subscribe my channel.